Let's turn to the US because tensions are rising in the United States as they prepare for the midterm elections there. It is a cycle which can change the balance of power for any sitting US president halfway through their term of office. Voters will decide who controls Congress for the next 2 years. The elections are hugely significant as they can have an enormous impact on the direction of the nation. Well, the focus on several key states, one of them being Arizona, from where our correspondent John Sudworth sent this report.
Arizona's rugged landscapes speak to its place on America's old Wild West frontier. Today, though, it's the politics that's wild.
Some of the most corrupt elections we've ever seen.
With the state at the vanguard of the Republican Party's stolen election claim.
You're across the pond and you think you know about our election.
Well, I'm only saying the audit here. The audit showed Biden won.
Let me just say one thing. If you think you're going to come over here and tell us how things are operating, you got another thing coming.
Candidates who deny the legitimacy of the last election are now running for the job of administering the next one, with the power potentially to decide which votes count.
You are still convinced that the result of the 2020 election was not sound?
Wholly convinced.
Had you held this position in 2020 and had the result of that election been on your desk here in Arizona, what would you have done?
Well, first of all, make sure that there were not votes that were outside of the law counted.
So this is the tabulation room where every single early ballot will be tabulated.
It's a system under siege, with election workers facing death threats and deluged by allegations without evidence.
It's one of the most preposterous allegations that you would think, nobody would give any credence to, but that built up a significant following and still has people that believe in it, is that we took ballots from the 2020 election, we fed them to chickens, and then we incinerated the chickens to cover the tracks.
Given all of that, how worried are you about the future health of this democracy?
I'm deeply worried.
Not everyone's glued to the politics, but it's never far away. Arizona was once a solidly Republican state, but like elsewhere in America, traditional conservatism is now grappling with rapid social change.
The myth of this stolen election is all about division, and it suggests something fundamental is being lost here. A readiness to accept that people with values that you oppose could ever legitimately win a majority.
Anybody think we're not in a war? In a war? That this civil war hasn't already begun?
But while far-right groups make inflammatory claims of war,
into economic collapse.
This meeting is sparsely attended, and a local Democrat candidate has even accepted an invitation to speak.
Okay. All right, it's fine.
The democratic process somehow struggles on for now. In this state, though, it's clear how this country's political fault lines are deepening. And in an election in which democracy itself is on the ballot, the polls are close. John Sudworth, BBC News, Arizona.
Well, a staggering landscape, but John is now back in New York, and he spoke to me just a little earlier about how ingrained election deniers were in the US political system now.
Election denialism is a big part of these midterms right across the country, but Arizona is somewhat of the epicenter of the issue. Republican candidates right across the party slate in that state all denying that Joe Biden won in 2020. We spent the best part of a week there, traveled from north to south, cities like Phoenix, Prescott, Sedona. And it's amazing just how deeply rooted that idea has begun. Almost 2 years after Donald Trump left office, the idea that there was something fraudulent, wrong, dodgy about the 2020 election really has taken hold of voters. And I think what's interesting is when you push some of the candidates, you saw us there pushing Carrie Lake, election denialism a very strong part of her campaign for the primary nomination for her party, perhaps less so now that she's trying to appeal to sort of middle-of-the-road voters. What's very interesting, I think, is when you push them, you do wonder how deeply held the belief really is from the candidates themselves. Undoubtedly, some of them, Mark Fincham, who you heard there, does seem to believe it. But part of it, perhaps, some commentators have suggested, is expedience. And although there may be some comfort in that, the idea that this isn't really that deeply held, of course, for people worried about American democracy, the effect is the same. This sense that this is all very, very deeply destabilizing.
And what about the importance of endorsements from Donald Trump himself? How important is that, given all his legal jeopardy, of course, that we've been seeing?
It's been vital, certainly through the primary campaigns for Republican candidates who wanted to get on to the party ticket. An endorsement for Donald Trump really did seem to matter. And as a result, we now have a situation where good estimates suggest that more than a third of Republican candidates for either governor positions or seats in the in the national Congress are all denying the legitimacy of that election.
It's interesting you say that, because voters really focus still on what happened back in 2022. I mean, there is so much that people are grappling with at the moment in terms of cost of living. I mean, what other issues are playing big in these elections?
Well, you're right. I mean, voter denialism is just one part of this. It's obviously a very divisive part of this, but there are a host of other issues. From the economy, of course, front and centre of voters' minds, the election denialism, which is rallying at least a part of the Republican base, to abortion, which is bringing Democrat voters out, concerned about that recent Supreme Court decision. And I think what's really interesting in the background to all of this, Matthew, if you look at the 2018 midterm turnout numbers, more than half of eligible US voters went to the polls in 2018. That was an historic high. Turnout expected to be possibly even higher than that this time round. And whatever you think about this politics of division that we're living through, not just here in America but elsewhere, of course, if participation itself is a measure of democratic legitimacy, well, on that score alone, at least, America isn't doing too bad.
John Sutworth.